When were you born?
I was born in 1925.
And what's your name?
Oh, my name is Lois Jean, and it used to be Sherman, and now it's Jongsma.
Okay, and what were your parents' names?
My father's name was Carl Edward Sherman, and my mother's name was Alberta Hess until she married.
Okay, what did your father do for a living?
My father was a railroad engineer in a logging camp, and I think he became an engine. He started out as a fireman on the locomotive in a logging camp in Vesta, Washington, in the Saginaw, for the Saginaw Timber Company. And I even have this book here about the Saginaw Timber Company with a picture of him when he was an engineer, and he was very young. And my mother worked at the post office, and they met when my dad was working on the railroad, and she worked at the post office.
Have you always lived in Washington?
I've always lived in Washington, yes.
Well, where were you born?
I was born in Vesta, Washington, and then when I was about 4, we moved to what is a little town called Brooklyn, Washington, but actually Vesta and Brooklyn were logging camp towns, and I think Brooklyn is, I'm not sure, I think Brooklyn might still be on the map, but I don't think there's a post office there anymore.
And where was this at, in eastern or western?
No, this Western Washington. It was 30 miles from Aberdeen, in the Grays Harbor area, over on the coast.
And how long did you live there?
I lived there until I was senior in high school, as I lived there through my junior year in high school, and then I left and I graduated from high school in Seattle. I went to stay with my grandmother for my senior year because at that time the logging camp was out of logs, and they had moved their logging business to Valsets, Oregon, and my dad got out of the logging business and went into the refrigeration business.
And so you moved.
I lived in Seattle after I left Brooklyn. I lived with my grandmother, and then my parents moved there, and that was in the 40s, the 1940s. I graduated from high school in 1943. Then I got a job at Miller Freedom Publishing Company, which was on Columbia Street in downtown Seattle. And I worked there in the circulation department for $125 a month. And then I worked there for a while. I can't say just how long, and I started going to the University of Washington. Went there for a while. I really couldn't make up my mind what I wanted to do. And after that, I worked for several different places. I worked for a real estate office, and I ended up working for Magnin and Company, which was a really nice job. I liked working for Magnin. I worked there in Seattle, and then I transferred to the Wilshire Boulevard store in Los Angeles and worked there for a while. That was before I was married.
And when were you married?
I was married in 1949 on Whidbey Island, Oak Harbor, Washington. I was working in, my parents moved to Whidbey Island because my father went to work for the NAS Whidbey as a refrigeration engineer. But I didn't go with him. That's when I went to Los Angeles and transferred down there and worked for Magnin there. But then my mother became ill, and I went to Whidbey Island, and then I met Frank and my husband, and I never left Whidbey Island. It was a beautiful place too.
So what kind of job did you have on Whidbey Island?
Well, my biggest job was just being married. We were married in 1949. We knew after we met, we knew each other for 3 months before we got married. And then I started having children. I had 5 children in 6 years. And then I had 6 years with no children and had 2 more. So I have 7 children in all. And of course, Grandpa Frank worked at the Whitby Naval Air Station, which was it was not a really high-paying job, but it was a job that had good benefits, and it was a good, steady job. And at that time, I was just busy having babies and doing everything that a housewife did, and also busy in our church at that time. We belonged to the Christian Reformed Church, and we were both singers, so we sang whenever we could, and I was a choir director at the church. And the children grew, and we had to put more bedrooms in the house. all those dandy things.
And what were your children's names?
Our oldest child is Martha June, and then there's Deanne, and then there's Alan Franklin, and then there's Gailey Lane, and Arnold Robert, and then our 2 youngest were Joy Lynn and Doris Jean. No, I'm not going to tell the years that they were born because I might have to stutter and stammer around for a little while. We also, later on, after the children were a little bit older, we had a newspaper. We had a newspaper business. That is, we bought Seattle Times papers from Seattle Times, and we hired newspaper boys. My husband took care of the business end of it. That is, Grandpa Frank took care of the business end of it, and I took care of delivering the newspapers to the boys, and the boys took care of delivering the newspapers to the customers. We did that for about 8 years, and then after that I started driving a school bus, and I did that for about 8 years. Now we're retired.
And now you live in Mount Vernon?
Yes, we sold our property and our big home overlooking overlooking Oak Harbor. Let's see, almost 4 years ago, and moved here to this retirement village, I guess they call it, Heather Lane Retirement Village, and we like it here fine. We like it because it's closer to all of our children and grandchildren. Although I miss Whidbey Island, I miss the beach. I always like to walk on the beach. Have a lot of shells and rocks.